Thank you for joining me. There's a common misconception and misunderstanding about exactly what the word resurrection means throughout the Bible. And we'll run into that tonight, but it won't be explained, well, until the very end. We'll get close to it. But you have to listen till then. So we better get started on this right away. The Old Testament Hope, that's the title of this lesson. I apologize for being late. My wife had unexpected surgery 3 hours from here at the beginning of the week. It was surgery that she wanted. It was important, but we didn't know that it was going to happen, and it did. And so it took half my week out. So that's delayed this, but I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope that it's still worth your time as we go through the Old Testament hope. We're talking about death, dying, and hope in the Old Testament. And, hope is really important. Without hope, the heart grows very faint and very sad. All right. So here is our memory text. By faith, Abraham. Now we're talking about the Old Testament hope, but this is Paul in Hebrews, or the author of Hebrews writing, and they're writing about an Old Testament character, Abraham, and the hope that he had. By faith, Abraham, when put to the test, offered up Isaac. He who had received the promises was ready to offer up his only son. He considered the fact that God is able even to raise someone from the dead. And figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. But of course, Abraham was facing something more than just the figurative. He was facing a real possibility of the death of his son, and yet he was not afraid to do what God said, because he realized that God had the power. But we'll look at this, the Old Testament hope. It's a fascinating situation here. Now, the lesson topics that the author has are, I shall see God, from the power of the grave, from the depths of the earth, your dead shall live, and those who sleep in the dust. And you see here a mixture of things. Some have to do with the return to life, and some have to do with where the dead are. And we'll look at that, even look at the Hebrew on that, because the power of the grave, the depths of the earth, sleeping in the dust, all these things are figures of speech, because, well, even in the Old Testament, even in the New Testament, and probably even today, we don't understand what is going on after death, what some people call the intermediate state, nearly as well as we'd like to think. It's a mysterious thing. And so we'll look at these, but there's basically two questions. Number one, the question of, will they be alive again? Will it be really them? Will it be exactly who we knew here? And the second part is, what is this thing, the grave? What happens when we're in the grave? What does this mean? Let's go. Job says, as for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and the last he will take his stand on the earth. Even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall see God, whom I myself shall behold, and whom my eyes will see, and not another. Some remarkable statement of faith by Job, and a remarkable understanding. He says, I see this, that my skin will be destroyed. They knew what happened. They could see that you put a body in a cave. Most of them, the time, they put them in a cave. And that over time, the flesh disappeared, and the bones were all that was left. There was no person there. The skeletons could disarticulate. And yet, even after that happened, he still had faith, he said, that even though that might happen to him, that he would still see God. And there's some interesting things here, because we talked about this previous lesson. We're going to look at this. Even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall see God. Now, remember, we talked about this last time that when God created humankind, he he breathed the breath of life into the dust that he'd formed, he'd formed the dust of the earth. And so he breathed that breath of life into the dust, and yet when the person died, they gave up that breath back to God, and the dust, the chemical part, we would think of it as the dust went back to dust, and the breath went back to God. And so even after his skin was destroyed, he says, "Yet from my flesh I'll see." So he knows that when he dies, his body will return to the dust. Yet somehow he will be reconstituted. He sensed that, he believes that. He will be reconstituted, and not just physically, because there's something else he says here. I myself shall behold him. Now, we already saw last week that when his spirit departs, when the person's spirit departs, he returns to the earth that very day, his thoughts perish. But here we have him saying, well, it'll be me. So his thoughts are going to come back to him somehow. His memories, his consciousness, his self-awareness will all come back. I myself shall behold whom my eyes will see, not another. It's not going to be somebody else. It's going to be me. I have that kind of faith in God. And boy, he was put to the test, wasn't he? So he had that kind of faith. Really amazing, it seems to me. Now, another text, another thing they talk about here is that God will redeem my soul from the power of the grave. That's one of the titles. The power of the grave. That's in the NKJV. For the NIV, it says, but God will redeem me from the realm of the dead. He will surely take me to himself. The power of the grave, the realm of the dead. What's going on here? And being who we are, being people who are infused with Greek philosophy as well as biblical knowledge, we want to know exactly what he's talking about. What is it? Is it the power? Is it the realm? What is it? Well, the grave apparently has the power, or apparently there's a ruler. A realm has a ruler. But exactly what's going on here, and we'll discover why it is important to understand how the Bible was translated. The difference between Hebrew, the Hebrew rendering of these words. We talk about this all the time. That there is no simple translation that is not also an interpretation, because there are words that just simply do not translate into another language, or we have figures of speech, idioms we call them, which don't necessarily translate into another language. They don't make any sense, whereas they make sense in the original language, but they're idioms, they're figures of speech. And so I want to look at the Hebrew here. You can do this, anyone can do this. There are a number of places you can find the Hebrew Interlinear online. And I'll just show you here what this is. It's very interesting. Yes, Elohim, that is the proper name of God. It means it's the plural, except when it's talking about God of Israel. Elohim, he shall ransom. He shall ransom me. Well, of course, that's a redeeming, ransoming, very, very good. We can see similarity of that. Soul of me. And if you can see that, you have the NPHSH. We talked about the nephesh, that which has breath, but it's about the person who has breath. God breathed the breath of life into the clay, and he became a nephesh. He became this living soul, this living being. So, soul of me, myself, he shall ransom me, myself. And then it says, from hand of, unseen. Now, hand of, something I can hold in my hand is something I can control. It's something I can rule. They talk about a scepter in the hand. He will rule with an iron hand. He will rule with an iron scepter. So the idea is, the hand of control. You have this. And so when it says the hand of, it's talking about there's power there. And there is a realm. There's a ruler. And you can see the power of the grave, realm of the dead, are both reasonable translations for the hand of unseen. It is a place which is unseen. Yes, we can dig up the bones, but we don't know what happens in the grave, Sheol. And you can see there it is. Now, of course, don't forget what they've done in this transliteration is they've written the sentence, they've placed the words backwards. What I mean by that is if you read the Hebrew Sheol, if you read it from right to left, it says Sheol. But if you were to write it in a sentence, you would put the Ek Elohim Ek would be first, and so forth. So the words are exactly in the reverse order, but the spelling is in the proper order, if that makes any sense to you. Yes, Elohim, he shall ransom soul of me from hand of unseen. So you understand now why these interpretations, translations are necessarily interpretations. Nevertheless, by comparing these, you can see the power of the grave, the realm of the dead. There's this place, and it has some hold of some kind, but it will not be permanent, because God will ransom us from there. He will redeem us. Both of them use the word redeem, but ransom would make perfectly. God will ransom my soul. That makes perfect sense. So I bring these things to you because people can understand. It helps us to realize how different the Hebrews thought in ancient times than we do today. And the difficulty, sometimes we get too certain about the meanings of certain words because, as you can see, from hand of unseen, we can't go on and on about it has a power and what the power is, or the realm and there's a ruler. We have to understand that it's talking here about this hand of the grip, the holding on. There's something there, but it's unseen. We don't really know what it is. It's a mystery. And it still is in some ways. Now, we won't go into all of that right now, but as these lessons move forward, we will. So, the psalmist has confidence that God will bring him back to life of some sort. Again, of a real sort. The dust, Job talks about my own eyes. It'll be me. I will see him, not someone else. So it is, we don't know exactly what it's like. And that is going to be when we get into the question of resurrection, exactly what it means. Well, you'll see as we go along. Really interesting. Now, Isaiah 26:19 says, your dead shall live. Isaiah is amazing because he talks to the future generation. And he's saying, your dead shall live. And that's really, that's important as well. A great understanding. Isaiah has a marvelous understanding. So, Daniel 2 or 12:2 has some really interesting things to say. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. Here we see for the first time a hint at what is mentioned in the New Testament of two resurrections, and that they are not the same kind of existence that takes place. One will wait to everlasting life, and the others will wait to everlasting contempt. And what exactly does that mean? Well, I'm not sure that Daniel even knew. He understood that there was going to be a division, and that those who were loyal to God would be raised to everlasting life, and others would be raised to another fate. But the point is, there are two different things. All of them will be, it says many of those, it doesn't say all of them, but most everybody will be brought back to life in one way or another. But some will be brought back for a different kind of life, a life that does not end. And others will be raised for judgment, disgrace, everlasting contempt. So all of that, And then we come to a central key here, and it's the only key I'm going to share from this particular lesson for the simple reason that there aren't a lot of key points in this lesson, but there are some things we do need to look at. But the first thing is the Old Testament hope is a hope. Why? As Paul tells us in the New Testament, you don't hope for something which you have, you hope for that which you don't have. And the hope is expressed in this way: I will see God, your dead shall live, he will redeem my soul. All of these are in the future tense. That there's hope for the future, but none of them has realized this. And I'm going to say this again: there are no resurrections recorded in the Old Testament. We'll get there in a minute. All these are in the future tense, and that, of course, then means that it is hope because no single episode of resurrection is recorded in the Old Testament. And that's a key to understanding here, that there is no single episode of resurrection that is recorded in the Old Testament. Now, and I say we will take a couple of lessons, it looks like, from the way they have things scheduled here, before we really grapple with this issue fully. But I'll say this much and only this much. There are 3 apparent exceptions. 3 in the Old Testament. And by the time I get done, you're probably going to be wondering, what in the world is he talking about? Well, again, it'll take 2 or 3 lessons, but let's look at them. The first one is the widow of Zarephath. When Elijah caused it not to rain, he prayed to God earnestly that it would not rain, we're told in the New Testament. And he went before Ahab and said there would be no rain until he said so. He went out of Israel to Zarephath, and there he met the widow of Zarephath. You know the story. She said she said she was going to make one cake. She had just a little flour and a little oil. She was going to make one cake, and then she and her son were going to die. And Elijah says, "Make one for me first." And she did. And throughout the famine, the cruse of oil, it says, and the flour never failed. She had enough to feed herself, her son, and the prophet, Elijah. But at one point, he actually expired. He died. And Elijah raised him. So the woman of Zarephath's son was brought back to life by Elijah, obviously the power of God working through Elijah. But she had benefited in many ways. Not only did her son not die of starvation, as she had said they were preparing to do, but when he had another problem, Elijah brought him back to life. It's a marvelous example when you think about it. So there is Elijah. The second apparent exception, and again, it's only apparent. And what do I mean by that? Do I mean they're not brought back to life? Oh, they were definitely brought back to life. The woman of Shunums' son. And this is in the story of Elisha. In fact, all 3 of these apparent exceptions are linked directly to Elijah and Elisha. Fascinating. Those 2 prophets. The woman of Shunem, she's the one who had the room made for Elisha because he was traveling through Shunem very often. And so she aided his ministry. In fact, as I discovered when I wrote the book about all the women that show the initiative and have a chapter on the woman of Shunem, it really literally is impossible to tell all of the amazing deeds that Elisha did for God without including the story of the woman of Shunem. She was integrally involved in his ministry. And he gave her a son, even though she had not asked for one. And then one day, it appears that her son had died of a sunstroke. We don't know, but he was out in the field, and he came back, and he was dead. And she went to get Elisha, who was at Carmel at the time. And she went and got him, and when he returned, the boy was dead. In fact, when the mother had left, she said the boy was dead, but she didn't let her husband know, probably because he was older and might have swept him away as well. But anyway, Elisha came back and he raised the boy to life. And the third exception, apparent exception to this, is a fascinating case, and that is the soldier whose body was thrown onto the bones of Elisha. Elisha died, and this is one of the questions that people, Elisha, was he not as good as Elijah? Elijah was translated. Now, that's not being brought back to life. That's being changed and taken to heaven. We have two episodes of that in the Old Testament, Enoch and Elijah, but those are not being brought back to life. They did not see death, apparently. But here we have Elisha performed many miracles. In fact, he performed more miracles than anyone else in the Old Testament, and more miracles than anyone in Scripture until the time of Christ. And that's a whole story in and of itself. In fact, just Elisha, when Elijah said, if you see me go up, what do you want if you see me go up? And Elisha says, I want a double portion of your spirit. And it's very clear. The double portion, of course, is the older brother's portion. The eldest brother got a double portion. And of course, as I just said, Elisha performed more miracles than anyone except Christ. So it seems very much as though he got Christ, the elder brother, as a figure of speech, it says, of the human race in the New Testament. So he did get the elder brother's portion. And there's another way, which is, well, it's very interesting. I mentioned it in my book. And it turns out that he had something in his ministry that was parallel to what Elijah had, but it was exactly twice as much in Elisha. He got the double portion. That's as far as I'm going to go with that right now. But if you want, you can read my book. Anyway, the soldier, what happened was Elisha died, and they buried him in a cave. And there was a battle going on, and a soldier was killed. And his companions took him bodily, carried him, and it says that they threw his body into the cave. And the story tells us that it landed on the bones of Elijah, and he leaped to his feet. It's a very strange episode, but it appears to be a testament to the fact that Elisha was as important a servant of God, as worthy a servant of God as Elijah. But God chose not to translate him. That's just the way it is. We don't know. And we could spend a lot of time in Job again to talk about why that is, but we don't always know. God has his purposes, and we have to be content with them. But here are the three apparent exceptions. Now, some of you will say, well, wasn't Moses raised? He was resurrected and taken to heaven. Well, it's not mentioned in the Old Testament. He lived in the Old Testament times, but we're told about that in the New Testament. And in fact, there it's referring to a book which is not in the Bible. So I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm simply saying that it was not something which is recorded in the Old Testament at all. And someday perhaps we'll study that in more depth and understand what's going on there. But clearly Moses was resurrected, because in the Transfiguration, all the accounts of the Transfiguration make it clear that Moses is there, and so is Elijah. But it doesn't occur. There's no mention of it in the Old Testament. And that's all I said so far, is that there are no recorded examples in the Old Testament of resurrection. But there are these three apparent exceptions. And I know we're not taking it very long, but this lesson is pretty well taken care of. And I'm just going to have to leave it there for now. As the lessons move forward, the next couple of weeks, we'll get into exactly what, if these aren't exceptions to the rule about resurrections, what are they? And what is it that we're missing? In any case, remember the key thing here is that all the Old Testament writers had hope and faith that God could restore to life, could resurrect us. And it would not be somebody else, and it would not be dependent upon this body, because that will turn to dust, but that somehow God will reconstitute us in the resurrection. As Job says, his own eyes would see, and not another's. And he would know it. It would be his knowledge, his memories, his understanding. So it would really be him. It wouldn't be some other sort of happy zombie-like people. We often think of as people in heaven, who people are resurrected, are going to be very real people. And praise God for that. So that's where we are for this lesson. The Old Testament hope. It was a hope because it was not yet realized. But God is reliable, and they knew that. Well, I hope that this has been useful to you, and I hope that if you can, you will find a way to support us. You can do so through your prayers. We'd certainly appreciate that. If you would like information from me or contact me, I'm at BibleJourneys@yahoo.com. And there are many more materials available at www.patreon.com/BibleJourneys. I hope that, again, this has been useful, and in another few days, I'm hoping that there isn't any more unexpected visits to hospitals 3 hours away in my future, but I'm hoping in a few days we can get another Bible journey together. Until then, may God bless.